"Take off that ring," Jae-min said, so quietly that Simone almost thought she had misheard him, until the dining room fell silent. She stood beside his table after 9 hours on her feet, unwilling to be ordered around by a stranger. Jae-min, a 37-year-old Korean-American executive, no longer watched her face. His attention had fixed completely on the old gold ring on her hand. The ring held a worn sapphire and 6 small diamonds, and Simone had worn it since Evelyn gave it to her 3 years earlier. "If you want to ask me something, ask," Simone said, setting down the coffee pot. "But you do not get to tell me what to remove." His uncle Seong-ho looked at the ring and lost enough color that Simone noticed before Jae-min said, "My mother wore that ring for 26 years, and my family believed it disappeared the week she died." Simone curled her fingers toward her palm because the claim felt like the beginning of an accusation, then explained that Evelyn had given her the ring and never suggested it belonged elsewhere. Jae-min asked Evelyn's name, where she had lived, and whether she had worked for a Korean family, while Seong-ho repeatedly urged him to leave the matter alone. That warning interested Simone more than Jae-min's questions, because Seong-ho sounded less confused than frightened. When Jae-min asked to inspect the band, Simone refused, and he deliberately stepped back before explaining that 2 Korean characters were engraved inside. Simone had always mistaken them for scratches, but Jae-min translated them without hesitation. "For the life you gave back to me." Evelyn's final warning returned with sudden force, because her grandmother had once said somebody might recognize the ring, but Simone should never let that person tell the story before she told hers. Simone revealed only that Evelyn had expected the ring to be recognized, and Seong-ho pushed away from the table so abruptly that his chair scraped the floor. Jae-min asked whether his uncle recognized the engraving, but Seong-ho insisted he knew only the setting and accused grief of turning resemblance into certainty. Simone had served enough wealthy tables to recognize when someone was protecting a version of events, yet she also noticed Jae-min had stopped issuing commands and started asking permission. Before returning to work, she agreed to speak with him after her shift, provided the ring remained on her hand and every question about Evelyn happened on her terms. Jae-min accepted without argument, which unsettled Seong-ho. During her final break, Simone searched photographs scanned after Evelyn died, looking for anything from the years when her grandmother worked night shifts in Chicago. Near the bottom of an old folder, she found Evelyn outside a brick apartment building beside a Korean woman in a cream coat, both women decades younger. The woman's face was unfamiliar, but the sapphire ring on her hand was unmistakable, and Simone felt the baby shift as she enlarged the picture with unsteady fingers. On the back, Evelyn had written 2 names, Evelyn and Mi-sook, and Simone remembered the memorial portrait displayed near Jae-min's table earlier that evening. When she returned at 11, Jae-min was waiting alone, and his expression emptied when he saw the photograph before saying, "That is my mother." He asked Simone to enlarge a hospital discharge notice visible through the apartment window, and the date printed at the bottom was March 7, 1989, the day Jae-min was born. The photograph changed the question from whether the ring belonged to Mi-sook into why Evelyn stood beside her on the day her son entered the world. Jae-min reached for his phone to trace the address, but Simone stopped him, reminding him that Evelyn's life was not a corporate problem he could solve by assigning staff. He placed the phone face down and agreed that Simone would bring only what she chose the following day, while nothing she brought would leave her possession. As she put on her coat, he asked why Evelyn had given her the ring, and Simone repeated the only explanation her grandmother offered. It belonged to a promise she had already kept. Jae-min went quiet because Mi-sook had once told him that some debts should never be repaid with money, and the similarity left neither of them comfortable. Outside the restaurant, Denise called after receiving the photograph and went silent when Simone mentioned Mi-sook, then warned, "Whatever that man told you, do not give him the ring, because your grandmother spent years hoping the Han family would never come looking for it." Simone stopped beneath the awning, one hand beneath her coat as the baby shifted, and asked Denise what Evelyn had feared the Han family would discover. Denise answered only after Simone promised to come alone the next morning, explaining that Mi-sook and Evelyn met while working nights at a North Side rehabilitation center in 1988. Mi-sook cleaned rooms while pregnant because her husband's import business was barely surviving, and Evelyn, then a nursing aide, noticed the dizziness and bleeding supervisors had dismissed as exhaustion. Evelyn forced management to call an ambulance after Mi-sook collapsed, stayed through the delivery, and kept helping while complications left Mi-sook unable to work. Denise said Mi-sook eventually repaid every dollar Evelyn provided for food, medicine, childcare, and rent. Yet the ring was never repayment for money. Your grandmother said Mi-sook gave it because she remembered who stayed when everyone else had reasons to leave, Denise explained, before adding that Evelyn later paid dearly for keeping another secret. The next morning, Denise placed a dented cash box on her dining table, then pushed a yellowed envelope towards Simone with Jae-min's name written across the front. Mi-sook had written the letter, while Evelyn kept it under instructions Simone had never known existed, along with hospital bills, receipts, checks, and a handwritten repayment ledger. Simone studied the dates rather than accepting anyone's memory, because she had already seen how easily family stories hardened into fact when nobody checked the paper underneath. Several ledger pages carried initials matching Seong-ho's name, and one note in Evelyn's handwriting stated that Mi-sook had covered her brother-in-law's debt before paying Evelyn herself. Denise admitted Seong-ho had been struggling with a failed business then, but said the money mattered less than what happened after Mi-sook died. Jae-min's father opened the family jewelry box after Mi-sook's funeral and found the sapphire ring missing, never knowing his wife had given it away years earlier. Seong-ho did not directly accuse Evelyn, but he reminded his grieving brother that she had once had access to the apartment, allowing suspicion to settle where it protected him. Simone asked why Evelyn had not produced the repayment records, and Denise said defending herself would have exposed Mi-sook's hidden loans, Seong-ho's dependents, and another matter Mi-sook had begged her not to reveal while Jae-min was young. Evelyn chose silence at first, then regretted it for years, because preserving another woman's promise had also allowed people to rewrite her character without resistance. Simone disliked the idea of turning that choice into sainthood. Evelyn had not enjoyed being misunderstood, and love did not make the cost disappear. Simone refused to open Mi-sook's letter because whatever waited inside had been addressed to Jae-min, and she would not become another person deciding what he was allowed to know. She photographed every document, returned the originals to Denise, and took only copies, the sealed letter, and an envelope of photographs buried beneath the ledger. One picture showed Mi-sook holding infant Jae-min while Evelyn sat beside her, and a much younger Seong-ho stood behind them with his hand resting casually on Evelyn's shoulder. His familiarity made his claim of barely knowing her impossible, but the sentence written on the back mattered even more. Seong-ho knows what Evelyn did for us. Simone read it twice before sliding the photograph into her bag, realizing the mystery was no longer whether Evelyn had been misunderstood, because the paper had already answered that. What remained uncertain was whether Jae-min would accept proof that made his own family responsible, especially when the truth threatened people he had spent his life trusting. Simone called him before leaving and required Seong-ho to attend, warning that nobody would touch the ring or remove a document from her possession. Jae-min asked whether she had learned something serious, and Simone answered that seriousness depended on whether he wanted facts badly enough to keep listening after they stopped flattering his family. After several quiet seconds, he agreed without bargaining, and Simone could not tell whether the restraint came from respect or simply the discipline of a man accustomed to winning later. Denise asked whether she trusted him, and Simone said she did not know him well enough for trust to mean anything yet. Yesterday he learned how to ask, she said, feeling the baby move again, and today I am going to find out whether he also knows how to hear no. By noon, Simone entered the same private room without a tray, carrying Mi-sook's sealed letter beside copies of Evelyn's records, while Jae-min waited near the window and Seong-ho sat guardedly at the table. Simone repeated her conditions, then placed the photograph between them and turned it over so Mi-sook's handwriting could not be avoided. Jae-min read the sentence slowly and asked why a woman Seong-ho supposedly barely knew had written that he understood exactly what Evelyn had done for their family. Seong-ho called the note sentimental, but Jae-min reminded him that sentiment did not explain the repayment ledger or the initials tied to his failed business. Simone watched Jae-min resist the easier reaction of defending blood first, and that effort mattered more to her than any apology he might have offered. Seong-ho admitted Mi-sook had lent him money, yet insisted he never meant for Evelyn to be branded a thief after the ring disappeared from the family jewelry box. Jae-min asked whether he had told his father Evelyn could have taken it, and Seong-ho answered carefully that he had only mentioned her access to the apartment. You gave grief a suspect and kept your own name out of the conversation, Simone said, refusing to let precision turn into innocence when the consequence had been obvious. Seong-ho finally admitted he had been ashamed, frightened his brother would learn Mi-sook supported him, while her own household struggled. Jae-min asked how many years he had watched the family repeat a story he knew was incomplete, and Seong-ho said he kept believing correction would create more damage than silence. Simone then placed Mi-sook's envelope before Jae-min, reminding him that neither she nor Denise had opened it, despite having every reason to want answers. He broke the seal carefully and read that Mi-sook had given Evelyn the ring freely after repaying every loan, because money could reimburse expenses, but could not measure the nights Evelyn stayed when she feared she might die. Mi-sook also wrote that Seong-ho knew the arrangement, knew the ring was never stolen, and had promised that no accusation would ever touch Evelyn's name. Seong-ho closed his eyes when Jae-min reached that sentence, and his regret finally looked less defensive than personal. Jae-min separated a second sheet stuck behind the first, and the shorter page changed the meaning of the ring again. Mi-sook explained that the engraving had originally been commissioned for Jae-min after his birth, because surviving the delivery made her think of him as the life returned to her. Years later, she gave the ring to Evelyn instead, but asked Evelyn to decide whether it should ever return to Jae-min's family, and through whose hands. Simone looked down at the sapphire and understood why Evelyn never treated it as borrowed property, while Jae-min finally said what she had needed to hear since the restaurant. Then it was never mine to reclaim, and seeing it did not give me the right to demand it. Simone nodded without rewarding him for reaching a conclusion the evidence required, although some part of her relaxed when he looked at her rather than the jewelry. At the bottom, Mi-sook added that Evelyn knew what happened during the night shift before Jae-min's birth, followed by one reference. Incident Report 3-689, North Lakes Rehabilitation Center. Seong-ho recognized the reference before he could hide it, and Jae-min caught the change in his face before Simone even turned toward him. Rather than asking his uncle to explain another secret, Jae-min said he wanted the report itself, because they had heard enough memory without seeing the record underneath. Seong-ho warned that the center had closed decades earlier, but Jae-min remembered boxes from his father's earliest medical contracts stored in the Han family archive. Simone told him she would not allow employees to search Evelyn's history without her, and Jae-min answered that she could be present while he searched the business records himself. He promised no copy involving Evelyn would leave the room without consent and asked Seong-ho to join them the following morning. Seong-ho hesitated long enough to answer the question nobody had spoken, and Simone understood that somewhere in those boxes might remain proof of what powerful men had chosen when Mi-sook needed help most. The next morning, Simone followed Jae-min into the Han Foundation archive, where decades of business records sat in numbered boxes that smelled faintly of paper and dust. Seong-ho arrived late and watched Jae-min request the 1989 files without offering help, which told Simone more than another denial would have. They found North Lakes Rehabilitation Center among Dongwook Han's earliest medical supply clients, then traced March correspondence through invoices, renewal notes, and carbon copies preserved long after anyone expected them to matter. Near the back of one folder, Simone found a photocopied employee complaint bearing Evelyn's name and a stamped date from the morning after Mi-sook was hospitalized. It stated that Mi-sook had reported pain, dizziness, and bleeding for hours before a supervisor allowed emergency care, while Evelyn insisted an ambulance be called. Jae-min read the page twice before looking at Seong-ho, who had stopped pretending the file meant nothing. A second document made the silence harder to defend because Dongwook's handwritten note appeared beside a draft response prepared for North Lakes management. He wrote that the complaint should remain private until the center renewed its supply agreement, explaining that losing the account could endanger a company already struggling to survive. Simone felt anger move differently now, because this was no longer a misunderstanding shaped by grief. Someone had knowingly chosen business stability over a woman's right to challenge unsafe treatment. Jae-min asked whether his father ever filed the complaint after renewal, and Seong-ho admitted that he had not. Mi-sook recovered, the company survived, and the urgency faded until silence became the version everyone preferred. Simone asked whether Evelyn knew, and Seong-ho said she confronted Dongwook after discovering nothing had been filed, then left North Lakes when management began cutting her shifts. That detail struck Simone more personally than the financial records. because Evelyn had always described leaving North Lakes as a simple job change whenever the family asked. She had protected Mi-sook's privacy, kept Seong-ho's debts hidden, challenged an employer that could punish her, and then absorbed suspicion over the ring without turning private pain into public defense. "Do not make her a saint because it is easier than admitting she was angry," Simone said when Seong-ho called Evelyn noble, and he lowered his eyes. Evelyn had regretted her silence, and the papers showed choices constrained by loyalty, work, money, and another woman's fear, rather than some perfect appetite for sacrifice. Jae-min stood with his father's note and said the man who raised him had spent decades teaching that family came before business. Simone answered that people sometimes build their strongest rules around failures they cannot bear to repeat, and Jae-min accepted the possibility without turning it into forgiveness. The archive also showed that the North Lakes contract helped Dong-wook's company establish credibility with other medical clients, although nothing suggested the entire Han business had been built on one concealed complaint. Jae-min insisted on that distinction, refusing both the family myth that his father did nothing wrong and the simpler story that everything he built was corrupt. What remained undeniable was narrower. Dong-wook knew Mi-sook's treatment had been delayed, protected an important client, and allowed Evelyn's intervention to disappear from the family account. Seong-ho added that Mi-sook confronted her husband years later and received a private admission, but feared telling Jae-min while he was young would destroy his relationship with his father. Evelyn had been expected to explain when the time felt right. Yet after Mi-sook died and suspicion settled on her, she stopped believing the Han family deserved access to the truth she carried. Jae-min asked Simone what her family wanted, but she refused to answer while the choice still belonged partly to him. "First decide what you do when the truth costs your family something," she told him, because an apology offered only after permission was too easy to mistake for character. Jae-min knew a formal review could damage his father's reputation, force the foundation to revisit its history, and expose Seong-ho's silence to relatives who still treated him as an elder beyond question. He also knew keeping everything private would preserve the arrangement that had protected the most powerful people for 37 years. After a long pause, he said he would commission an independent review of the North Lakes records and correct his family archive regardless of publicity. Then he added one condition for himself. Nothing about Evelyn or Mi-sook would be released publicly until Denise and Simone decided what belonged outside their families. 3 weeks later, Simone returned to the Han Foundation offices for a small meeting with Jae-min, Seong-ho, 2 outside attorneys, and the compliance director. Denise declined the invitation, so Simone carried written limits describing which medical details could be discussed outside the room and which remained private. The independent review confirmed Evelyn's complaint, the North Lakes contract, Mi-sook's repayment history, and the correspondence showing Dong-wook delayed action while his company depended on the center. Nothing proved the Han business existed because of wrongdoing, and the reviewers refused to exaggerate the truth. Their conclusion was narrower and harder to dismiss. Dong-wook knew treatment had been delayed, chose not to challenge a valuable client, and allowed Evelyn's role to disappear from the family record. When the lead attorney asked whether the correction should remain private to avoid damaging people who could no longer respond, Jae-min did not make Simone carry the decision for him. He said the family archive would be corrected completely, including his father's note, Seong-ho's knowledge, and Mi-sook's letter, because a cleaner version would simply repeat the original mistake with better legal language. Seong-ho asked whether his grandchildren would eventually read about the debts and the suspicion he allowed to settle on Evelyn, and Jae-min answered that descendants deserved inheritance without editing disguised as protection. Rather than humiliating his uncle, Jae-min asked him to write a full account of what he knew, what he feared, and why he remained silent after the ring disappeared. Simone appreciated the distinction because punishment could satisfy anger without producing truth, while an honest record would force Seong-ho to leave behind a version that did not flatter him. Seong-ho agreed after a long pause, admitting he had spent decades calling his silence loyalty because cowardice was harder to carry into family gatherings. The harder question concerned what should become public, because the lawyers could correct internal records without naming Evelyn or reopening a decades-old employment dispute. Jae-min wanted to fund patient advocacy for low-wage healthcare workers who reported unsafe practices, then asked whether Denise would permit Evelyn's name to be associated with the program. Simone declined immediately, explaining that a polished tribute could turn her grandmother into a symbol more convenient than the complicated woman she had actually been. She asked instead for a program protecting workers from retaliation when they raised safety concerns, without naming either family or turning private pain into a redemption campaign. Jae-min accepted the condition without bargaining, and Simone noticed how different that felt from the man who had first assumed recognition gave him the right to reclaim something. Meaningful repair often looked quieter than spectacle. After the meeting, Jae-min admitted that several relatives had accused him of disrespecting his father by placing the old documents into the permanent family record. His father had also been loving, disciplined, generous with family, and proud of the company he built, which made the North Lake's decision harder to absorb rather than easier. Simone told him she did not need Dong-wook turned into a monster for Evelyn to have been wronged, because ordinary people caused lasting harm whenever fear or convenience became more important than someone with less power. Jae-min said that was why the correction had to remain intact, since blaming everything on one uniquely bad man would allow everyone else to avoid recognizing the smaller choices that produced the same damage. Before the elevator doors opened, he thanked Simone for refusing to make the truth comfortable, and she answered that comfort had never been part of their agreement. Winter arrived before the foundation completed the archive correction and approved the worker advocacy program, while Simone left Mercer House on maternity leave and prepared for the child who was already rearranging her life. Jae-min did not send extravagant gifts or use influence to insert himself into that transition, although he checked once to confirm Denise had received the final language for approval. Denise changed 2 sentences that made Evelyn sound more self-sacrificing than she had been, and Seong-ho submitted a handwritten account admitting how his shame shaped the suspicion. Reading it did not make Simone forgive him, but the lie no longer depended on her family carrying the burden of disproving it. A few weeks later, as early labor tightened across her lower back, Simone slipped the sapphire ring from her swollen finger and placed it beside Evelyn's photograph before calling Denise to drive her to the hospital. For the first time since Jae-min recognized it, the ring looked ordinary again, and Simone realized that was not a loss. Elise Carter arrived before sunrise in early January, healthy and loud enough that Denise laughed through tears and said the child had entered the world already objecting to poor management. Simone was too exhausted to answer, but when the nurse placed Elise against her chest, she understood why pregnancy had made the old story feel increasingly personal. Mi-sook had entered motherhood frightened, underpaid, and dependent on people who could dismiss her pain, while Evelyn recognized danger because she chose to believe another woman before authority confirmed she deserved help. Simone refused to turn history into destiny simply because the ring connected 3 generations, yet she wanted Elise to learn that care was not weakness and gratitude did not create ownership. Before leaving the hospital, Simone put the sapphire ring back on her finger because it belonged there, not as evidence or obligation, but as something Evelyn had consciously chosen to give. 2 months later, Jae-min came to Simone's apartment after asking whether a visit would be welcome, arriving without expensive gifts or any attempt to make generosity the center of the room. He carried an archival box containing authorized copies of Mi-sook's letters, Evelyn's ledger, the North Lake's complaint, Seong-ho's statement, and the correction entered into the Han family record. The originals remained divided between both families according to their wishes, while these copies belonged to Simone because the history could no longer be separated into his side and hers. Elise slept in a bassinet near the window, and Jae-min glanced toward her only after Simone invited him closer, careful in a way that would have seemed impossible during their first conversation. He also told Simone the advocacy program had approved its first grants, giving several workers independent legal and reporting support without turning Evelyn's name into a plaque. Simone felt relief that the repair had survived contact with the institution. Jae-min admitted one part of the correction had taken longer because several relatives wanted the archive to describe Evelyn's accusation as an understandable mistake caused by Dong-wook's grief. He refused that wording because grief explained his father's vulnerability without explaining Seong-ho's silence. An explanation became dangerous when it quietly erased responsibility. Simone read the final page, where the record stated plainly that Mi-sook gave the ring voluntarily and that suspicion toward Evelyn continued despite knowledge within the family contradicting it. The language was almost boring, which Simone appreciated, because truth did not need decoration when the facts were finally allowed to stand upright. "My father would have hated that paragraph," Jae-min admitted, and Simone replied that loving someone did not require protecting them from every accurate sentence written after they were gone. He accepted the discomfort without asking her to soften it. For a while they talked instead about Elise's refusal to sleep longer than 3 hours, and Simone's uncertainty about returning to Mercer House after maternity leave. Jae-min did not offer money, a job, or rescue disguised as opportunity, and Simone noticed the absence, because months earlier he might have tried to solve whatever difficulty he saw. He simply asked what Simone wanted next, and she admitted she had begun considering nursing school again, a plan postponed when bills and family obligations became louder than ambition. Jae-min said he hoped she pursued it, then stopped there, allowing encouragement to remain encouragement, rather than converting it into leverage. Simone smiled because restraint had become the clearest evidence of his change, more convincing than the grant program or the corrected archive. He had learned that respect sometimes meant leaving another person's future untouched until they invited you into the decision. Before Jae-min left, his eyes rested briefly on the sapphire, and he admitted that he once believed the ring was the last important thing his mother had left behind. Simone told him Mi-sook had left something harder to inherit, because objects could be possessed, while truth demanded a response from whoever received it. Jae-min looked toward the archival box and said he was trying not to turn that truth into another thing his family owned, then thanked Simone for refusing to surrender the ring when he first demanded it. After he left, Simone lifted Elise from the bassinet and carried her to the window, where winter sunlight caught the sapphire and threw a small blue reflection across the blanket. Evelyn had carried another woman's promise. Mi-sook had trusted someone society found easier to overlook, and Simone had inherited the chance to end the part of their story built from silence. She kissed her daughter's forehead and understood that the ring did not bind Elise to the women before her. It proved that love could travel across generations without requiring the next person to repeat their sacrifices.